Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Housing-Based Case Management Training for the Michigan Balance of State Continuum of Care. My name is Ashley Halliday-Schmant, and I am the Director of the Northwest Michigan Coalition to End Homelessness, and I'm partnering with the Balance of State to provide the basics and the basic training you'll need to provide exceptional housing-based case management. So here's the training outline. We've decided to kind of bucket out some of these trainings so that if your providers only need one of these sessions, they can come in, watch that, get the information, and we don't have to sit through kind of like a 4-hour training all at once. So these are segmented out. First, we'll be reviewing the core components of housing-based case management, and that's what this training is about. So let's get started. So the core components of housing-based case management are what we're going to talk about today. To be an exceptional housing-based case manager and to provide exceptional housing-based case management services, staff need to be trained and professional. We need to offer training both through trainings like this, core components. We need to provide training in writing around the core components of job descriptions. And then we also need to provide modeling and actual on-site, real-time, live modeling and shadowing of what it means to be a housing-based case manager. Exceptional case management is always trauma-informed. It's housing-focused. There are professional boundaries in this work, and it's documented, planned, and sequential. And planned is spelled wrong. But documented, planned, and sequential. It's not haphazard. It's not, I'm driving through the neighborhood. I might just stop in and check in on this person. It's not that. It's planned, it's sequential, and it's trauma-informed and client-driven. What housing-based case management is not, so this might help you also kind of shape your programming around what it should not be focused on. So housing-based case management is not a crisis service. It should never be driven by the crisis. If we start building the case management client relationship in crisis, it is more likely to always be in crisis. And if our folks are always in crisis and our case managers are always responding to that, you have a really hard time moving beyond that and getting to the actual work that it takes to maintain housing stability. So not to say you cannot respond to a crisis if it's happening, but likely the housing-based case manager is not going to be the primary person that should be responding to a crisis. I've talked about this with our teams in the past around if there's a fire in your apartment, that's what I would label as a crisis. Please don't call me, the case manager, for that. Please call 911. Likely by the time I'm able to do anything about it, it's too late because I'm not the appropriate person to respond to that. And you can go through different scenarios with your clients around what would a crisis look like and who would be the best person to contact in the event of a crisis. So we'll get to that during crisis planning. So more on that to come. Housing-based case management is not doing things for clients, it's doing things with them. So we're always reminding clients of that we are here as a coach role or a support role to help them through things. Now in the housing identification process, I would probably argue you are going to be doing things for clients, right? You're going to be searching for housing for clients sometimes. So this isn't a black and white statement. Sometimes you will have to do things for clients, but primarily we want to always be doing things with them and modeling and teaching clients how to do things on their own. It's not a dependent relationship. It's not a friendship. It's a professional relationship with boundaries. It's not a destination, it's a process. So we always want to be thinking about the end goal, and the end goal likely is always to minimize the supports that are needed in order to maintain housing. We want people to be able to do this on their own eventually, especially in a rapid rehousing type program. With PSH, it's a little bit different, but however, PSH, the support services should also be tapering off over time. The amount of time it takes might be longer, but we always want to be thinking about this as a process of eventually creating more independence for the client. And it's not without conflict. If you're doing your job right and you're really rooting the relationship in a housing-focused, client-centered way, there's likely to be conflict, and that's okay. It's how we respond to the conflict and how we work through that with our clients in a really strengths-based way is what's critical here. So the goal of housing-based case management is to help stabilize people once housed by connecting them to services and supports if needed. So it should really focus on helping people navigate the barriers that stand in their way of securing and maintaining housing, while also striving to build support systems in their community. And what we find in the research and even just in practice, what we have found true time and time again, is the more people are connected to other people outside of the service delivery people in their lives, and are building real relationships with other neighbors or within their community, the more likely they are to be successful long-term in their housing. If we create these relationships that are completely dependent on service providers, people have a really hard time separating that. And that can lead to isolation, and that does not result in long-term quality of life and long-term success in housing. So I'll always be thinking about the other places that you can provide connection to. Some are going to be service organizations, but then also how do we build out people being integrated into their communities? And we'll talk about that in later trainings. So related specifically to rapid rehousing assistance should end and the case is closed when the individual or family is no longer facing the threat of homelessness. However, case management may continue if appropriate or requested. So we have another training in the series around exit planning, and there's a really great exit planning tool offered through OrgCode that I'll share with you guys that I think really gets to the heart of when people can be successfully exited from case management. Rental assistance might end depending on the program, but case management might continue. And what does that look like? Because that process can get kind of in a gray area around. For some people, you could be working with them for the rest of their lives, and some people in PSH might require that. Most people don't, though. Most people are not requiring that intensive of a service need. So how do we really focus on connecting them with the things that they do need in order to maintain housing and build those connections beyond you, because knowing you as a case manager will not be there forever. This is another slide I took from OrgCode. We used to have this up in our case management office. We kind of blew it up and made it pretty big because these are the kind of the core tenets of the work. So in order to, I'm not going to read all of these, I'll just highlight a couple that really stand out. And again, not black and white. Please don't take these as the end all be all. These are suggestions, some of them. But the ones that really jump out and I want to lift up for the training here are support workers do not act like crisis workers. So we're not acting as if folks need to contact our housing-based case managers every single time something goes wrong, related or unrelated to housing. And again, that will come up later in crisis planning. We have no intention to heal or fix people, right? We're taking a really client-centered, strengths-based approach to this work. And we know that our role is to walk alongside people and really establishing their own independence and maintaining housing on their own. It's not our job to heal or fix anyone. To be really rooted in housing first, we make the assumption that people do not have to complete any mandatory programming prior to moving into housing. We are housing first in everything we do. Again, with housing first, people don't need to have a source of income prior to moving into housing. People don't have to be sober prior to moving into housing. People don't have to graduate from transitional housing to be considered for housing. Okay, so, and then people receive supports based upon acuity levels and presenting issues. Those are all core tenets of a housing first approach. And there's an excellent training on that Jessica did for us. So that's all I'll say about housing first. Supports are delivered in the person's home, not in an office. Now, again, that's going to vary depending on the person, but if we're doing really exceptional housing-based case management, we're doing that in the home. People have individualized service plans. And then I think the final one that I'll lift up, and you can read the rest, if people lose their housing, they don't lose their support. And that's huge. So if really what that's getting at is, let's pretend someone is, we'll use PSH, permanent supportive housing in this example. Let's pretend someone is in a PSH program. They're utilizing housing-based case management and the rental subsidy, and they get evicted. They have a lot of lease violations, and they are being asked by their landlord to leave the unit. That does not mean they lose their program. It means that they lost their housing unit, right? And so the program stays with them. Just because people get evicted does not mean that they're losing their program and their support. The program and supports are still attached to the person. They're just now focused on rehousing them, okay? And sometimes, unfortunately, it happens where folks lose their housing and they actually go back to the streets for a period of time, but they're not losing that program and they're not losing that program support, okay? So these are the phases of the process from homelessness to housing. You'll see in phase one, most of that, or I guess all of that, is really not the focus of the housing-based case manager. Now, depending, again, everything here is not black and white, but depending on your local capacity, the housing-based case manager might be doing some of these same roles listed in phase one. But really, and that's okay, we just want to really identify here that the housing-based case management part starts at lease up. So you can't really provide housing-based case management if the person is not in housing, right? So the real work that we're going to be talking about throughout this series happens at the time of lease up. Once you are matched with with a program participant, you want to start talking about the housing search process and what that will look like. So again, a lot of this is talked about in the rapid rehousing training that the kind of basics or core components of rapid rehousing. So I'm not going to get into that really at all in this scenario. But I want to put that in there because I think that's a huge part of this work. Next, we want to ask them to describe what they think case management supports will look like in housing. Okay, so we're not going to do a lot of case management while people are still experiencing homelessness. Our job while they're experiencing homelessness is to get them housed. After that, we start thinking about what the supports will look like in housing. If we're using a progressive engagement approach, which we'll talk about in a second, for rapid rehousing programs, if we're doing that through progressive engagement, we want to think about what is the least amount of assistance they think they'll need. So rather than offering folks who are matched to our program a predetermined package of programming, we're not doing that. We're not saying, here's the rapid rehousing program. It has rental assistance for 24 months it comes with this, that, and the other thing, here you go. Okay, that's not what we're doing. Rather, maybe 24 months of rental assistance and weekly case management is available to them, but we want the client to drive what that looks like. So by saying it, by reframing it and saying, what's the least amount of assistance you think you'll need in order to be on your own and maintain housing on your own? You'll be surprised at what people come up with, and it's really an empowering thing for people to do. So next, we want to ensure that people are comfortable with home visits, explain what that could look like. We want to be really conscious here that we are not, especially if people are dealing with paranoia or that sort of thing, we want to make sure they don't think we're coming in and inspecting the place, right? And, you know, doing all that sort of thing. We're coming in because that's a person's home, and that's where this sort of work is most effective. And if they're not comfortable with that, how do we progressively engage them and kind of ease into the process? We need to let them know that our primary focus will be on housing stability. Housing stability, again, what you can do, and what I used to say all the time to some of our teams are, okay, I'm going to put it bluntly, but using a different reframe of this, what does that have to do with housing? Okay, so we're not going to say that necessarily to the client. You might want to use that terminology in working with teams, but how does that relate back to housing stability, right? So if clients are throwing at you when you come into the home visit, you know, a myriad of different issues in their lives, that's okay, but we always want to be focusing on what does that have to do with our housing stability plan, okay? And really empowering them to think about what it means to be a responsible tenant. Then when they come up with those things, we can keep, you know, pointing back to that during the housing-based case management work. You identified, client A, B, C, that these 4 things were important to you, and what you described as being a responsible tenant. So how can I help you? How can I partner with you to really work on those things and get better at those things? Okay. So we'll talk a little bit here about progressive engagement. Again, this is an approach to the work, one that you can really implement wholeheartedly throughout your entire programming. You can pick out places within your system and your programs that it makes the most sense. Here, we're going to talk about how it makes the most sense for housing-based case management. So generally, progressive engagement is the practice of helping households end their homelessness as rapidly as possible, despite the barriers, with minimal financial support and resources. More supports are applied to the households who struggle to stabilize, and it's not dependent on a number or a score to determine what the household needs. So I know if we read this in this really literal black and white fashion, it could seem like it's flying in the face of what we're doing with prioritization and housing-based case management. So what I'll challenge you guys to do is really think about how we can do this in a client-centered, strengths-based way. So if we're really thinking about the strengths that our clients have, we're starting the conversations and the relationship around housing-based case management by saying, what's the least amount of assistance you think you'll need from us? And doing that in a way where they also know that more can be provided if they need it, but we're going to start from a place of letting them drive it and letting the client identify what is needed. And it really just goes back to not offering like this program package to everyone in the same exact way, because we know everyone needs something different, and that housing support and stabilization looks different for every single person, no matter the acuity score, no matter the barriers they're presenting with. No 2 people are alike. So the supports that we offer should also be individualized to the person. Really, if we think about progressive engagement as providing the right intervention at the right time is really all it is. Okay, so we are focused on avoiding false assumptions, meaning we're not going to make assumptions about what the client needs before they have the chance to tell us. Okay, let them drive that conversation. Sometimes people, we've housed people in our community right from the streets into permanent supportive housing, and within 6 months realized, oh my goodness, they don't need permanent supportive housing. And then we were able to transition them onto the Moving Up program and an HCV. So we're lucky to have that resource in our community, but I think that's just a great example of we made the assumption of what the person needed rather than, you know, using kind of this progressive engagement approach, starting the person in rapid rehousing and really getting a better understanding of what they need for long-term stability. I've already talked about this, but we're going to do housing-based case management that's really individualized and tailored to the person, giving them the right amount of time and assistance to meet their needs, not a package deal that is kind of just applied to every single person, no matter how they're presenting. And then really, to be an effective service provider using this approach, we're always ready to pivot. So in effectiveness, it says the program may need to do something different if they help the same participant again. So I like to think about that as when a program fails, or when we like to say, not like to say, but when we've said before, a participant failed in this housing program, it's reframing that and saying, what can we do different to make sure that the person doesn't fail next time? So taking some of the onus on our programming and say, what about the program didn't work? How can we support this person different? And a lot of times that goes back to just tweaking the service approach, just the approach in general. And not to say it's the program's fault or the participant's fault. It's not really taking this blame or this place of blame. It's just saying, if we're having pretty low success rates in this program, there's got to be something about the program that we can tweak to better serve people. And I really, really love that approach over time. So this slide came from the National Alliance to End Homelessness several years ago, but I think it sums it up pretty well to structure financial assistance and case management assistance using progressive engagement. So what you're doing is you're initially providing a basic amount of assistance, not a package, but a basic amount like a security deposit and first month's rent. Like everybody should probably get that. Most people need that. Then we're going to periodically assess the path to self-sufficiency to determine whether or not to extend assistance. So that goes back to what I keep saying is you're not offering this predetermined package to every person. We're saying, okay, what's the least amount of assistance you think you'll need? Let's pretend the person said, I think I'll just need security deposit, maybe like 2 or 3 months of assistance until my HCV comes through, or until I can get a job and get back kind of on my feet. So then at the month prior to whatever they said, so if they said, I probably need about 3 months, every month until then, you are asking them, what are we doing to reach that goal that you determined that at 3 months you were going to take over the rent? Or you said you were going to need to be connected with X, Y, and Z supports. What are we doing to make sure you're connected with X, Y, and Z support so that by month 3, we can start transitioning off the program? And then obviously you'll be able to extend assistance as needed. That's really about being proactive and involved in the person's life. It's not a phone check-in once a month saying, you need more help, you need more help. When we frame it like that and we don't build the supports based on what the client's strengths are, likely people are just going to say yes, like, yeah, keep going, you know. So it's all about reframing right from the beginning. And then you and the client together determine when another intervention is needed. So if we've done a really good job at progressive engagement and we see at the end of the program, hey, they really need more. Like we're seeing some huge barriers at the end of this. We've tried X, Y, and Z thing. They're connected to everything that they said they needed to be connected with. They're not able to maintain the rental payments because we've tried all of these other interventions. Maybe they really do need to transition from rapid onto PSH. That's okay, but we want to try other things first. So that's it for the core components of of housing-based case management. Next up in the series, we'll talk about moving in and how folks will be able to move, or how you'll be able to provide exceptional housing-based case management services after folks move into housing. So stay tuned and thank you.